searching soul, and someone says, send me, here I go. I know, I know, I know, I know. God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move in many mighty ways.
Be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you will not believe, even if you were told. Habakkuk 1:5. The story of the Monticello United Methodist Church is the story of God doing amazing things, moving among His people, ministering to them through this church. Our church has a rich history, going back 184 years, back to the very beginnings of the Monticello community.
Our church was actually born in Orworks Tavern on Bluff Street, where the O'Connor Mansion stands today.
We officially became part of the Methodist Church in 1850, and that's when God moved us to build our first church on the corner of Main and Marion.
From 1833 to 1870, our church was served by circuit riders. In 1887, a great revival led over 200 people to Christ, with 140 new members. Our church needed a bigger place to worship, so this church was built at the corner of Main and Harrison 130 years ago.
Over the next 80 years, God led this church to find new ways to minister to this community.
The 1928 edition brought a new pipe organ. We Methodists have always loved beautiful music. Those organ pipes continue to provide the backdrop for our sanctuary today, almost 90 years later. In 1933, we had our first centennial celebration. It won't be long until our next one.
In 1965, a pivotal year for this church, we were overflowing with children and youth, and so a very important chapter began.
Pastor Hornick challenged our congregation as part of the heritage of the faithful. He said, "Our heritage as a church in Monticello will not be complete unless you and I carry it on and hand it on to the future generations."
Our church responded by building a new education wing, as well as fellowship hall and a large commercial kitchen in the basement.
That building program was aptly and perhaps prophetically named We Have Room. Our church members from 1965 would surely be amazed at the ways their faithfulness would impact our church and community in the coming years.
On Wednesday, April 4th, 1974, tragedy struck, a deadly tornado. The damage of our building was slight compared to the devastation around us. Ruth Cottrell told an amazing story about our church and the tornado. Right after the storm, she came into town to check on her restaurant. As she surveyed the devastation, her eyes were drawn to our church, still standing amid the ruins. She was amazed to see storm clouds directly overhead and what appeared to be a giant hand protecting it. She believed she had seen the hand of God and that it was a sign that a great revival would come to Monticello, originating in our church.
Our church was in a unique position to help our community. The Salvation Army established its distribution center here. Our commercial kitchen served 5,000 free meals that Saturday and on each of the next several days. 75,000 meals were served over the first 3 weeks. It took many months for the community to recover. Junior high classes were held in our church. Our kitchen became the main kitchen for the school corporation, used to prepare and distribute school lunches. On one day alone, all at the same time, there was a church meeting in a classroom, a high school band practice in the basement, a funeral calling in the North Exon Chapel, and a wedding rehearsal in the sanctuary.
In the months before the tornado, God led our church to reach out to the folks beyond our walls by beginning a radio broadcast. Just 3 days after the tornado, we broadcast our first service. Because the tornado had damaged the local radio station, officials used our radio setup to broadcast important relief information. To this day, we continue to air our services on Sunday. For many shut-ins and others, this broadcast is an important part of their worship experience. Our repairs included replacing the steeple and some of the stained glass windows.
In 78, God moved our church to partner with Lakeshore Drive-In to minister to the folks who visit Monticello during the summer months. Nearly 40 years later, we still invite folks to come as you are, worship in your car.
In 1989, our church began Sunshine Center Preschool. In the last 28 years, hundreds of area children have been blessed to learn about the love of Jesus at a tender age.
In 1995, we needed more room for our ministries. The result was our Walk in Love, Build in Faith campaign. This renovation created a spacious parlor and a new main entrance with drive-through. Perhaps most significantly, we installed an elevator.
As we became more accessible, we began reaching out to the community. In 2001, people were hungry for food and fellowship. Thus began Soup for the Soul, a twice-monthly free dinner. On the first night, Nancy Bloom and the other organizers went out on the street and persuaded one person to come and eat with them. Despite that humble beginning, Soup for the Soul quickly became very successful. Soup serves nearly 200 meals a night, along with Christian fellowship. Well over 4,000 meals are shared a year. In 2002, our church built on the success of Soup for the Soul by partnering with other churches to host an annual Thanksgiving meal. Each year, hundreds of meals have been served and many more delivered to families in our area.
2002. That was another defining year for our church. We still felt the physical limitations of our building. We met to discuss our future and discern our next step. Should we relocate to a larger property and build a new church? Or, if we stayed, how could we meet the needs of our expanding congregation and ministries? This was a difficult conversation. We had strong emotional ties to our physical church, but we also needed more room to be able to fully share the message of Jesus and serve His people.
After much prayer and discussion, we decided to remain downtown, and we directed our trustees to actively pursue the purchase of 6 properties around our church. It was a huge leap of faith to believe that we could actually acquire these properties. Our modest hope was that we could somehow get it done within 10 to 15 years.
But God was on the move.
We began acquiring properties, and we quickly enjoyed the benefits. Early on, we transformed the house on the corner of Illinois and Harrison into the gathering grounds. Within 4 years, we were offered the opportunity to purchase all 6 properties. In fact, in 2006, on Pastor Wes Brookshire's last day of ministry, the 6th homeowner came into the church office to ask him if we were interested in purchasing her property. What a blessing! We actually ended up acquiring 2 additional properties on the block, including the current office annex.
Yes, God was faithful, and we were utterly amazed.
We expanded our parking. We created a huge green space where our children and youth could play. The green space also allowed us to hold big tent meetings each fall during the Reach Out and Love weekend.
In 2008, we refurbished the exterior of the building and reconditioned the stained glass windows. One of the windows has a few pieces of stained glass that don't quite match. The artist who repaired the window after the tornado had been unable to obtain the exact colors.
In 2008, the artisans indicated that they could replace those pieces with a closer match, but they advised against it, believing that those mismatched pieces were an important part of the church's history. Even as we were moving forward, God continued to remind us where we had come from by stepping out in faith.
Our church continued to make improvements. We built a basketball court and a wonderful playground for our children and for the neighborhood.
In 2012, we began a fruitful congregation journey in which we sought to discern God's will for our church and its ministries. Our first task was to embrace the mission of the United Methodist Church, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And then we came together to create our vision statement for this church. The vision of the Monticello United Methodist Church is to create welcoming environments where all can connect to God, grow in Christ, and love one another. We began looking at demographics and rethinking the way we do worship. 2 groups are projected to grow in the next 10 years, 18 to 34-year-olds and those over 65. We needed to develop passionate and consistent worship services that target those groups.
Debuting in September 2013, MUMC now has a traditional service at 9:30 called The Classic, and a contemporary service at 11 o'clock called The Current. Attendance quickly began to increase, especially among families with young children.
In September 2014, the congregation voted to approve a master plan that helps our church achieve our vision. There was no turning back now. God was on the move in this church. In 2015, we began our fundraising campaign called Believe, Ignite, Transform. First, we had to believe and take steps of faith. By doing so, we were able to ignite the vision that God had given to us as a congregation. By igniting the vision, we had faith that God would use our church to transform hearts and lives.
Following the plan, we moved the church offices to the new annex and removed the houses on Illinois to create additional parking.
The biggest part of the plan called for the renovation of our original building and a major addition.
As the plan began to come together, our church responded in faith in September 2015 by beginning a daycare ministry, The Garden. The Garden is currently growing and blooming.
The brick house next door posed an obstacle to the next stage of the plan. We were reluctant to demolish it, but it needed to go. We sold it to Sharon Walker for $1, who moved the house from the property in November 2015.
Construction began on the addition to the church in April 2016.
And here we are. What a perfect location for the current worship service. We will be able to use this large area for worship, recreation, gatherings, and meals. We also have a larger commercial kitchen, additional restrooms, a stage area, and a second-story youth area. For 184 years, God has been on the move in this church, blessing its people and ministries in ways that leave us utterly amazed.
Here we have created a welcoming environment where all can connect to God, grow in Christ, and love one another.
We can't wait to be amazed at the ways He will use this, His church, and you, His people, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. At Monticello United Methodist Church, God is on the move.